Welcome to the Evolved Caveman, where men learn to be successful and happy with your host, Dr. John Schinnerer, as he shares the most impactful ideas and practices for you to get the most from your relationships, your work, and from your life. Now here's Dr. John.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. John back with the latest episode of the Evolved Caveman. And I got to say, I am really thrilled for this episode because it touches on a couple of my favorite subjects: intimate partners, relationships, and sex. And my guest today is Dr. Renée Hilliard. And Renée is a certified intimacy and relationship coach. She is dedicated to helping people create more fulfilling sex lives and relationships and live more authentic and empowered lives. She has spent 20 years as a physician practicing sexual medicine before transitioning into online somatic coaching. A recovering perfectionist, people pleaser, and high achiever, Dr. Hilliard knows the effects of cultural conditioning on sexuality firsthand. She studied psychobiology at UCLA before receiving her medical degree at U of M, University of Michigan. Being a neuroscience nerd, she loves diving deep into the brain, our biggest sex organ, and teaching people simple yet effective hacks that can quickly improve their sex lives and their communication skills. She believes, and research has shown, that life satisfaction is largely determined by the quality of our intimate relationships. Renée, welcome. How are you?
I'm great, John. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Thanks for being on. I'm looking forward to this conversation. So to start off, tell me a little bit about you at your very best, sort of your story of hassle to happiness.
Yeah, so I grew up in one of those families where high achievement, like you said, was the thing. And it makes sense. I'm a Black woman, and to be successful in this society, you have to work hard. And both my parents are physicians. My grandfather on my mother's side also was a physician. So I saw that modeled, this hard work equals success by our standards, by our cultural standards. And so I was smart and I could do well in school. It didn't take a lot of effort on my part to do well in school. So I just went that way because that's what we were encouraged to do, all of us. And I also got the messaging along the way that being emotional was not something to be, which a lot of men get. So my father was one of those, he grew up in the 40s. So he was one of those guys that you don't wear your emotions on your sleeve and, that's weak, that's, feminine. And so I got conditioned a lot like a lot of guys do in, you got to hold that in, you got to push that down and just, power through and, dismiss your emotions and really just, be a machine and perform. Mm-hmm. And I did really well at that. I was successful by those standards, but I didn't feel fulfilled inside. And so I spent the last 20 years looking for what it was that I was missing. And a lot of that was that I wasn't in touch with my own emotions. And once I started to dive into that and recover some of that, I realized that that's something I really wanted to bring more into the world and my work.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's amazing to me because I think one of the things that I believe is that of all the 7.3 billion people on this planet, one of the primary goals for us, everyone, is happiness at some level or satisfaction with life. And the funny thing is, as a society or societies, I think those emotions are often socialized out of us, don't feel, don't show what you're feeling. And yet happiness is primarily, I would argue, an emotional phenomenon. I think you can also throw purpose and meaning in there and relationships. But if we're totally disconnected from our emotions, I don't think we have a prayer of leading a happy, meaningful life.
Yeah, I agree. And the emotions also occur in the body. So most of us are walking brains, walking around and we think a lot. Our talk mostly comes from what we're thinking. But mm-hmm. most of us haven't gotten good at communicating what we're feeling or even recognizing what we're feeling. And there's a very narrow range of what we're comfortable with in our feelings. The rest of them we tend to push away. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't feel that way. I shouldn't feel guilty. I shouldn't feel shame or whatever else we're feeling. And it's important to start to cultivate a relationship with our emotions, not necessarily leaning all the way into them and believing them, but just to be able to honor them, what I am feeling. And that gives you the power to be able to choose your behaviors from a safer place, so even just being able to relate with one another, if you're not being triggered all over the place because you're not aware of your emotions and they just sneak up on you and you end up reacting to people, it's not really a powerful place to come from. I found in my own life that you're reacting to everybody else instead of being able to relate to your own emotions.
Yeah, and I like your line about you don't always need to believe your emotions. I was talking with a client yesterday about guilt, and I said, just consider your guilt on a 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being I don't feel much guilt at all, and 10 being I feel guilty pretty intensely. Where would you put yourself? And he's like, probably a 9. And I said, yeah, I would say that's true. So understand that that's true for me also. I'm a 9 or a 10, but I've had to figure out that there's a lot of times when my guilt is not telling me the truth. When my guilt is saying you did something wrong, and I have to push back with the rational side of me and say, well, hold on, did I actually do anything wrong? I mean, I know it feels like that, but I didn't actually do anything wrong to feel guilty about. So I think it's an interesting point. Just, you don't always have to believe your emotions. They're not always telling you the truth, but you do want to be able to identify them in the moment and figure out how to work best with them.
Yeah, right. And once you're able to do that, once you're able to, be with your own emotions and realize all these things that come and go, and it doesn't necessarily match the external circumstances. We've all probably had the experience of sitting on a chair trying to meditate. All sorts of thoughts and feelings come through. Nothing's happening really, so a lot of times we assign our feelings to something somebody else is doing. And if we can have those feelings and nothing's happening outside, maybe it's something internal that's happening. And that gives us the awareness that these things may not be real. In fact, probably 90% of them are not real. It's just something we either got programmed with early in life or it's hitting a nerve of something that we feel about ourselves. But being able to manage that better, and then also recognizing it in the other person, you start to realize that we all have all these emotions. We're kind of all the things, and that other person's all the things, and they may have different triggers and whatnot. But oh yeah, she's feeling shame. I feel shame sometimes, and being able to not react to that necessarily, just like we don't within ourselves. We can learn to be more powerful in the way that we show up in the world. That we don't necessarily have to react to the way everybody else is acting either.
Yeah, good point. So let's talk a moment about, there was a line in your bio that I fell in love with, which is basically the impact of the quality of our intimate relationship on our life satisfaction. Because I talk to a lot of men about this, that a lot of the men that I work with are highly successful at work, and yet their relationship at home with their spouse or significant other isn't quite up to snuff. And my contention is that if the romantic relationship isn't thriving, then their happiness is hamstrung. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. And I really feel the same thing with a lot of the clients I work with. They're wanting to be happier in their interpersonal relationships with family or with their partners, but they may not have the tools that they need to do that. And we tend to gravitate towards the things that we feel like we can excel in. So if they do well in work, a lot of times they put a lot of their energy and effort into that because it feels good. You get the reward that you're wanting. Where with managing emotions and being able to communicate well with partners, we may be deficient in those areas. We may be empathy impaired and all these other things. So if it doesn't feel good to us, a lot of times we'll avoid it. Whereas if you kind of slowly go into those areas where you may not have all the tools, but learn new tools in order to be able to communicate better with partners and relate better and become more vulnerable and be more at home in your own emotions, you can start to develop deeper relationships. And there's so many studies out there showing that the quality of the closest interpersonal relationships really does determine our happiness in life. And everybody says they want to be happy, but they put their energy elsewhere in achieving things, getting more stuff, getting more money. But if relationships are really where we find most of our happiness, we're social animals, then it seems that it would make more sense to put more effort into cultivating, more enriched, relationships that feel good to us. And if at the end of our life we're going to regret not having done that, maybe we can reverse engineer our lives to make sure that we're going to be where we want to be at the end of our lives.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about the 5 regrets of the dying, and I don't have the author. You have the author. Remind me of...
It's Bronnie Ware. She was an English hospice worker, and she interviewed dozens of people who were dying and asked them, what are the 5 things you regret as they were dying? And a lot of those things were about interpersonal relationships, lost friendships, that they didn't keep in touch with people from 50 years ago, and also their family relationships and their intimate relationships with love partners.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that fascinates me is, or that I recalled since we just a few minutes ago, is there was a study by George, and I might massacre his last name, Vallon, who did the Harvard Men study and followed men from, I think, the 20s up through the end of their life. And the biggest conclusion he came away with after following these men for the majority of their lives through their death is that happiness is about love, that life is about love. It's about relationships. And so I think friendships are a big part of that. I also think that our intimate partner relationship, our girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, those have a very, very big impact on our satisfaction with our life.
Yeah, I agree. And our relationship with ourselves as well. We are our most important lover. We're with ourselves from the day we're born till the day we die. And most of us are abusive to ourselves. The self-talk, we think about the repetitive self-talk, that 90% of our talk is about what we shouldn't be, not accepting ourselves and, how I'm so stupid, I'm so this, I'm unlovable, or I'm such a failure. And we wouldn't stick around a friend that talked to us that way, but we do it to ourselves. And there's opportunity for us to clean up some of that thought. It's not going to ever be 100% perfect, but to be aware of those thoughts and start managing them as well. But then also with love partners, looking at what kind of a relationship we want to cultivate with this partner and not seeing ourselves as adversaries so much as allies. And this is a team we're building, and learning each other's blind spots and weak points and all these other things.
Insecurities.
Insecurities, and supporting one another rather than trying to win all the time. And I think, some of that toxic masculine culture has taught us all that life is a game that you win. And a partnership, if you're on the same team, winning would be something that you would do together and try to figure out how we can both thrive together instead of this, me versus them. And, if I give up some ground, then they're going to win the thing. I don't think it's a useful way to look at partnership.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to your point of that man box culture and how we learn to be men. And one of the big things is be competitive, win at all costs, be aggressive, be dominant, those sorts of messaging. And I've talked with, former D1 athletes or pro athletes that are getting in arguments with their spouse now. And it's like, again, on a 1 to 10 scale, how competitive are you? With 1 being, I don't care, 10 being, I want to win at all costs. And they're like, I'm an 11. Okay, fair enough. That was my guess. And have you considered that you're bringing that same level of competitiveness into your relationship with your wife and into your arguments? And how well do you think that's working for you?
Yeah.
And it's so that it's a nice segue into the conversation or the topic of communication. So, because I think communication is a massive part of this. And I don't think we're taught a lot of these skills growing up, interestingly. So how does communication enter into not only a great relationship, but also into a great love life?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is a problem with people communicating openly with intimacy and sexuality is that culturally we've been taught to feel a lot of shame around it. We see it as taboo, to talk about your sexual preferences. Most of us cringe at the thought of that. And then there's also this messaging that a person can, develop the skills to be a good lover for everybody, when it's a really personal thing. So it's like you come into a relationship, and if somebody were to criticize or give you feedback that you don't like, there's this personal, I feel like it's a personal attack on my lovemaking skills. When if you were preparing food for somebody and they said, I don't like things that spicy, could you put a little less pepper in it? We wouldn't take it so personally. So it's really that our culture has taught us that these subjects are taboo. They shouldn't be communicated. Somebody should just automatically, or I like to say automatically, know what we prefer or what we prefer today. Our preferences can change from day to day. And so if you tell somebody to slow down, I know what I'm doing. What are you talking about? But this is my body and this is what feels good to my body. This is how much time my body needs to warm up, or I'm really stressed out about work. I need some time to drop in, and honoring your own body and the messages you're getting from it to slow down or stop when you need to. But then also being able to communicate that in a environment where it's not going to be, taken as a personal attack. And there's ways that you can deliver it that will be seen that way, and there's ways to deliver it where it can be better received. But I teach my clients a lot of tools around how do you communicate those things to one another without, you may feel, attacked at times. All of us do when somebody criticizes anything we do. But how do you work through those emotions and be able to show up in a way that you're going to be receptive towards whatever they're saying, and remember that this is a person that loves me, and we're just trying to make this relationship better instead of that us versus them thing.
When I really like the idea along with that men, I really want to encourage the men listening out there to have the courage to ask questions of their partner. Does this feel good? Do you like this? Would you like lighter touch, harder touch, before, during, and after sex? Because, one of the things that you brought up, Renee, when we were talking prior to this, was that a woman's body changes day to day.
Yeah. Yeah. And women's preferences change from time to time. A lot of women don't recognize that. So, the men listening to your podcast will be sometimes one up on their partner, that women will say things to me like, I don't know why my body doesn't respond the way it did, when we were on vacation or what have you.
When you were relaxed.
Yeah. And we're taught that our body is a machine and it should perform perfectly. And men have that same messaging that they get, that I don't know why I can't, do what I could do when I was 20. But the body isn't a machine. And the goal of sex is, I like to tell people, is really pleasure. Putting the goal of orgasm on sex, and a lot of times men will start to ask their female partners, are you there? Are you almost there? Are you almost there? And that can be a lot of pressure for women. Stressful for women, which we all know stress impairs sexual functioning. So just educating people on those kinds of things, but to I like to do a lot of comparison to food. You're not going to want the same meal every single day, and your appetite changes. Sometimes you're more hungry than you are. Other times, you can do like a whole marathon where you have an appetizer and a big meal and then dessert, and then sometimes you just want a snack. So it's the same kind of thing with sex, that you have your appetite, I have my appetite. I would never expect to know how hungry you are or exactly what you want to eat today. So we have that conversation, what do you feel like eating? And it's the same thing with sex. It shouldn't be any different. It's just that our culture has infused this shame and this, taboo thing around sex. But it's a natural phenomenon, just like eating is. And if you can start to see it more like that, you wouldn't assume where somebody wants to vacation. You wouldn't assume what somebody wants to eat. So why assume what they want in the bedroom tonight?
Yeah. And one of the things along with that point is I want to encourage the men that are listening to, because the men that I've worked with 100% hate to be embarrassed. And I think shame is part of that. And I think you're right. There's a lot of shame around sex and even using the words about the body parts for many of us. And I think I want to encourage the men to have the courage to step through that embarrassment, to open up the conversation, to ask questions. And then on the female side, I think women need to be encouraged to practice speaking up for what feels good, because I know that can be threatening and off-putting many times. They don't want to kill the mood. They don't want to say something that's going to be taken the wrong way by their partner, which I think is pretty easy to do. And then the last part of that is I think men need to work on receiving that feedback well.
Yeah.
So not getting butt hurt about, her saying, please touch me lighter.
Yeah. Yeah. And it may be that he becomes butt hurt when he's given feedback, because all of us, even if you're, a great athlete and you get some feedback from a coach, you're going to feel butt hurt sometimes, but it's really more about your behavior when being more in touch with your emotions, being able to sit with that butt hurt and be like, okay, this is something that I'm feeling and that's okay. But also I don't have to snap at my partner or just be like, never mind, or whatever, so how can I show up in a way that honors their feeling where I can listen to them, still feel what I feel, and then ask them what they need from me and be present there. And, you can have that butthurt feeling and love at the same time in the same body. It's actually possible.
Well, and I love that you just picked up that phrase "butthurt" like it was nothing. Like we have a PhD and an MD here talking about the clinical phrase "butthurt," which is a phrase I love. It was taught to me by my high school adolescent males, but I just think it has a lot of there. So. What are some ways, moving ahead, what are some ways that we can stoke the fire of arousal prior to sex?
Yeah. I love Esther Perel. I don't know if you
Oh, she's brilliant.
Yeah. But she says that sex starts at the end of the last sexual encounter, so it's really how you're showing up every day in your partnership and bringing elements of, connection into your everyday experience, kind word, loving words, even the things that you would do when you were dating. But a lot of times as we are in long-term partnerships, we forget to compliment our partners in ways that we did when we first got together. And especially as we move into parenthood, sometimes we don't give as sexually charged kind of compliments to one another because it doesn't feel appropriate for being a parent, or what if the kids heard us or saw us touching this way. But just bringing those things into our everyday experiences, people underestimate the importance of greeting one another in the morning and kissing and hugging and those kinds of things, and everybody has the different ways that they like to receive love, but just communicating with your partner. How do you most feel loved? What are some things that I could do to make you feel more secure in that, and offering that. Massage is great. We talked about that the other day, that just remembering that those things help us feel more connected. It makes it easier for us to transition into sexual relations when there's that, texting each other sexy things during the day, which is always a nice delight. We forget to do that as we're in partnerships for longer and longer, but sending those kinds of things, or even handwritten notes that you leave for people, posted on their computer, just to remind them that you're attracted to them, and those kinds of things can be really important. And then I teach women a lot to start the sexual encounter before they get in the bed with their partner, because it does take women longer. It takes women 25 minutes longer on average to achieve orgasm. But to start doing things that kind of wind you down from your day, you can turn on some music and do a little sexy dance. Doesn't have to have a witness. You could do it for yourself. You could take a bath. You can massage your own feet, all these kinds of things. Even for guys, I tell them in the shower, you can just feel the water on your skin and just, be fully present and feel those kinds of things. So you feel like you're in your body, and it kind of encourages you to get into presence and bring aspects of meditation into sex, be in tune with your breath and your body, instead of being checked out in your mind and like, I want to last longer, let me just think about baseball or whatever, but actually feeling into the experience and knowing when perhaps you're getting aroused to the point where you need to kind of back down, and just giving yourself that, slowing things down a bit, so that if it's going to take longer for her to reach peak pleasure, maybe I'll slow down a bit so that, I can last as long as it takes for her to achieve it, those kinds of things.
Yeah. And I think those are all great points. One of the things that crosses my mind in talking with men about sex and in my own kind of history, I think your point of mindfulness is really well taken, because I think that a lot of times we can be having sex and we're not there with ourselves when we're having sex.
Yeah.
So mentally we go to different places, and you can go to, negative past, negative future, positive past, positive future, but we're just not present. You can go to work, for example. Mm-hmm. And so I think, that practice of mindfulness is a huge component of this, because one of the benefits of mindfulness is attentional control. Mm-hmm. So you can bring yourself back to the bedroom, if you're having sex in the bedroom, mm-hmm. to, make sure that you're present when you're there. Because I just find that most people out there don't have very good ability to manage their own attention, their own presence, and it really can hamstring your sex life.
For sure. Yeah. And most men that partner with women, and most of my coaching is with heterosexual couples. This is not to say that this is the norm, or, that there aren't other experiences out there, but men that partner with women all have had, or most have had, the experience of having a woman who's checked out in bed, and it feels dirty and gross that you're with this person that's not really there. And most men will say that, like, I don't want to have sex with somebody it just feels like an inanimate object, doesn't feel like
a dead fish was a phrase I've heard before.
Those kinds of things. Yeah, just counting the ceiling tile.
Sorry, women.
Yeah. But women feel the same thing from men. So we know when men are checked out, when their mind is on something else, or they're focused on lasting or whatever and not really present. We can feel that too. And so both partners, it's really important to bring those aspects of mindfulness. First of all, that's where pleasure is experienced, and all things are experienced during the present moment. So the more you can be present, the more pleasure you can feel. And then you start to feel the subtle things that you'll miss if you're off somewhere. Some of it happens because of the shame, so a lot of people, religious conditioning, even if you weren't religious growing up, the culture has a lot of that in it. So it's like, I feel like I'm doing something dirty, bad, wrong. And so my mind wants to go somewhere else because I don't feel 100% good about sexuality in some way, or about my body, or, all those performance and that kind of thing. So, building that ability to stay present, and the breath is one of the easiest things, and that's why we use that for other types of mindfulness meditation, is that it's always there, it's easy to tap into, but to become aware of taking those full breaths during sex actually helps to liberate sexual energy and move it through the body. So men that want to become, have a more expansive experience with their orgasm, where it's not just genital focused, it's kind of like all body experience, or multiple orgasms. A lot of that starts with just being in tune with the breath and being present. And the nice thing about coaching is that it's not all people that are struggling. It's some people are doing pretty well, but they just want to be doing even better. And so I can coach on that too. People want even more expansive experiences in their sexuality. I'm happy to coach with that stuff too. So.
Well, and one of the topics that I wanted to get to was there was a myth that I used to believe that, wetness in a woman's vagina was related to how aroused they are. So educate us a little bit about that myth.
Yeah, so I think most men and women believe that, oh yeah, she was ready to go because she was wet. Or there's this thing about, I was a good lover because I made her so wet, or something. And women, a lot of times, they'll feel aroused and know that their vagina isn't lubricating the way that they would want it to. And so sometimes they can shame themselves, like, I don't know why I'm so dry. There's so many things that go into that. So some of it can be medication, like birth control pills. It can be alcohol, THC, that's being used more widely in the culture.
Even just water intake.
Yeah, water intake, dehydration. So if you think about anything that dries out your mouth, the vagina operates very much the same, as a mucous membrane. So anything that dries out your mucous membranes, sinus medications, all sorts of things can cause dryness in the vagina.
Sorry, I'm thinking, wow, mucous membrane, that's really arousing.
Yeah, that sounds really sexy. let me put some more medical terms in there that sound really sexy. So anything that dries out the mouth, and aging. So, older people just, their mouths are drier, so their vaginas are drier, and hormone status has impact on the vagina. So all those things, but a lot of vaginal lubrication is just sweat. So if I told a man, I know you're aroused because you're sweating, and when you're not sweating, that means that you're not aroused, that would sound ludicrous. It has to do with the temperature of the room, and just some people are sweatier than others, whatever. But vaginas are much the same, and it can vary from experience to experience. But I try to take that shame away from being dry. A lot of women are like, oh my gosh, I'm so dry now that I've gone through menopause. Just have lube handy, and it should just be a normal part of the sexual experience. No shame. Just get a nice, elegant bottle of lube. I have one called Uber Lube. Sounds real German and cool, but
I've got one called Lift Lube.
Lift, nice. But the bottle's like clear and glass, and it looks elegant on the nightstand. But just to take that shame away from wanting or needing lubrication, I think is important for a lot of people. And people get in their heads about it, like they'll make it mean too much. Oh gosh, she doesn't want me because she's not wet, or she does want me because she is wet. And the best way to find out if somebody's ready is to ask them,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and let me just repeat that point for people listening. Lube equals important. I mean, I've had this conversation with young couples that were just married, and they find that to be revolutionary. Like, really? Lube?
Yeah.
Some are like, what is lube? Some are like, we can use lube? Like, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's a really good tip. Just have lube around, have it handy.
Yeah. And if you think of any machinery out there with moving parts, there's, we don't underestimate the importance of lubing those things like cars and machines and stuff. So why not our bodies as well?
So one of the conversations that I have with younger men right now, like college age men, and it's about the minefields that have been created, and I think rightfully so, but as a result of the Me Too movement. So we've got this, what was a hookup culture, the Me Too movement comes out. Then, of course, we got COVID too, which kind of muddies the water even more. And I'm all for consent and women having the ability to say no at any time, or the man as well. But I do feel for these young men out there who are trying to wrestle with this issue. And, you've had a few drinks, you're at you're in a dormitory bedroom. And, where's that line of knowing when to stop when you're in kind of that full physiological arousal, passion mode? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's definitely challenging. I've talked to a number of people who sometimes they don't date because they're afraid that they're going to get in those situations where, like I thought that the person meant yes when they really meant no, and I don't want to be in a he said, she said thing, or, they're fearing harming somebody unwittingly, and those kinds of things come up. For one, 93% of language is nonverbal. So becoming attuned to when somebody's body is telling, even if their mouth is saying yes, and I'm not saying that it's on the person to know when somebody really means no and they're saying yes. It's on the person who's giving consent to say yes or no. But if somebody says yes and their body's saying no, maybe check in again, or maybe say, what, let's pause here. Because women sometimes will push through their no's or their maybes or their not yets, because they're fearing that they might lose a partner, that, if I don't consent, then they're going to go find somebody else, because it's so, sex is much more available nowadays than it ever was. And you can just, turn on an app and find somebody else. So there's a lot of fear in women that if I don't push past my own no, then I'm going to lose this person that I'm interested in. So just, reassuring people that, I'm not going anywhere, but I just want to make sure you're ready. Those are, and that's much sexier than giving a consent form. I don't want to sign a consent form for sex.
Well,
but, yeah.
What about the body language though? Because you had mentioned that before, and I thought those were really good tips.
Yeah. So I've studied a lot about negotiations. Chris Voss and the art of negotiation with FBI hostages, whatever. But 90+% of our communication is non-verbal, and there are definitely easy cues that somebody's not on board with things. A lot of it's like averted eye gaze. If you ask somebody a question and they do one of these, you're like, I don't know if you're really on board with it. You're saying yes, but your eyes are doing something. Anything that closes up the body. So if your arms are folded across your body, or if your knees come together, sometimes it just means you're ticklish or you're not ready yet or something. But for women, that's kind of a telltale sign. My knees are locking together, even though in my mind I want to be ready for this. I'm not quite, but my knees are telling the real story. So just believing those body movements and just being attuned to those things, and you don't have to be an expert to kind of get some of these cues when you're looking for them. I was a gynecologist for 20 years, so I know when women are like, go ahead with the exam, and then their knees shut on me. I'm like, you're not ready. Oh, no, doctor, it's fine. I don't want to take your time. I know you don't want to take my time, but I know you're not ready because the knees are clamped shut. So I'm going to give you a moment, and that's okay. And just giving permission for people to need a little bit, to take a little bit more time if they need it. Also, you can kind of warm up to a sexual experience by doing things like eye gazing, and it kind of softens your body and makes it more receptive to, moving, deeper into physical intimacy. So just taking those moments of, a few moments to kind of co-regulate and breathe together and, exchanging some words with one another, if that feels, good to you. But also the way that men see women sometimes can interfere with I don't know what I'm trying to say here. So a lot of times men don't realize that women are just as sexual of beings as they are, and with the Me Too, most women, there's a distinct qualitative difference between having somebody push past your no and physically take your body like that, and somebody being passionate and, just, masculine in the way that they present themselves sexually. There's a difference in your body, and the difference. I've known the difference when it's like, this person has no regard for me as a human. And if you have good intentions, most men are sensitive enough to pick up on, this person is kind of pulling away from me or something's off, and just taking a pause and like checking in to see if everything's okay and if I'm able to proceed. Just being okay if it's not a yes today, and and reassuring the person, okay, like maybe we'll revisit this another time. But I think well-meaning people are not reading the whole Me Too stuff. I mean, the non-well-meaning people are not reading the Me Too stuff. They're just, predators are predators, and they don't care whether anybody is harmed or not. It's an
interesting point that you make about someone like a man just, it sounds like objectifying a woman and her body and just treating that as an object to be, I don't know, dominated perhaps or used. That seems like a pretty small percentage of the population that would do that. I mean, that to me says sort of like psychopath, sociopath, maybe narcissist, someone that just, but I guess the other part of it is it is part of the man box socialization process that to some extent, men are conditioned to look at women as objects to be conquered. And that's one of the things I think that has to change.
Yeah. And we talked a bit about just, messaging in media and in songs, the baby is cold outside, or you gotta wear him down. Song. Yeah. A lot of times men,
which I still like. It just, it has a different lingering flavor to it. Disgust now. It's like, ugh, that's creepy.
Yeah, I have a different feeling about that Teddy Pendergrass song, "Turn Off the Lights." Turn it off. It's like, oh, it's kind of creepy now. When I used to like this song, but just the messaging has been, if you push hard enough, you can wear a woman down. The movie Grease, there was that. Did she put up a fight? All these messages we got as kids about how relations should go between a man and a woman, and if you get a no, keep pushing, and if you'll finally turn that into a yes. And if that is you, then you really need to sit down and look at your behavior and maybe adopt some better beliefs around how that should go. But like I said, I don't think those people are listening to how to be an evolved caveman. I think they're a different category of people,
right?
So
well, it's interesting to me because I think, on one level, men, particularly young men, need to learn to respect no, hear it and act on it. Oh, she's saying no, like, I got to back off. And on the other hand, it seems like young women need to stop playing the hard to get game on that level, right? That I think from a female perspective, it seems to me that they can't, or I don't know, it's hard to get the right wording around this without getting my head lopped off. But I think that if you're playing hard to get as a female, saying no, expecting him to overcome the objection because you think it's romantic or sexy, it seems like there needs to be a little bit of adjustment on both sides.
Sure. Yeah. And there is some.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I definitely have seen that. And there is some game playing around it, and women are conditioned as well as men are conditioned. Like, oh, you don't want to say yes on the first thing.
So you don't want to give it up too easy.
Play it, but kind of tease still, and there's some of that out there. The other thing that we get conditioned with is to push past our own no so much that what I've written before in my blog my biggest sexual perpetrator has been myself, because I push through my
Wow.
own no, even with partners. It's like, oh, like it's been a while, so I should say yes, even though I'm not really feeling it today, but I don't want to go another week because that feels like that wouldn't be a good relationship or whatever. Or, I've been dating this guy for a certain amount of time, and so I feel like that's the expectation. And
I should.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily, I'm not a prude, but then at the same time, I'm not quite where, I feel comfortable, but let me just kind of push through that because I don't, want to show interest or, we do a lot of weird stuff. We move a lot of weird ways. Somebody takes us for a nice, weekend away, and we feel like that's the expectation. So let me push past my own not yet, because I feel like that's expected of me. We all do this.
Well, let me ask you this. Could you get around that if you had a honest conversation up front, like before you left on the weekend, for example, like, I really appreciate you taking me away for the weekend. I'm really excited to go. And just so you know, I'm not ready to have sex yet. Something like that. Is that?
Yeah, it definitely wouldn't hurt. And if men, would say, I'm going to take you on this weekend away, by no means do I feel like that is a requirement on this weekend. I'll respect you. Whenever you're ready, but I'm not doing this so I can, to get to sex with you, which I would love to do. But at the same time, I want to wait until you're ready, because that would be even more meaningful for me than to have you push past your own no. So I want you to go on your own time. Let
me ask, you kind of blew my mind with the, the biggest sexual perpetrator has been me line.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining a couple that's in a relationship, so perhaps married or long-term relationship, committed. What if, because I know different couples who have different rules about sex. So some just don't have any after a while. Some have it infrequently. Some know that it's an important part. I would argue it's an important part of a healthy relationship. I knew some friends a while back that had the rule that if one partner wanted to, the other partner, unless sick, would do their best to accommodate.
Yeah.
So what about something like that, and how would that sexual perpetrator idea enter into that?
Yeah. So everybody can negotiate their sexual relationships however they like. One thing I think it can be useful for people is to set sex dates, which, like you were saying, unless there's a real good reason to reschedule, that you honor. But also, if there is a good reason, like you can reschedule for the next day if, there's the stress level so high or something else is going on. But everybody's sexual frequency is different, just like everybody's appetite or everybody's, desire to exercise, whatever. But most sex relationships are mismatched. It's very rare that you find two people that are exactly matched and that they're going to want to have sex at exactly the same time. That's just not a thing. But to realize that we're going to have different appetites, let's kind of compromise somewhere in the middle, and let's set ourselves up for success in scheduling times, and then you can have sex at other times too on top of that, but let's make it no less frequent than whatever you decide. Some people it'll be once a month, some once a week, some 4 times a day, whoever, whatever they decide. But let's set that as our expectation, and it's going to fluctuate. It's going to, there might be seasons. We all kind of have seasons where it's like, this is the dry season, and then we come back around, and now we're like all over each other again. And I think people get fearful when they go into the dry season. They're like, oh, is it going to come back? And this tends to be a cyclical thing.
Well, but, I think of it as moods, right? And the mood, our moods kind of ebb and flow, and same with our desire.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, things happen in relationships too, which can turn us off sexually if, somebody mismanaged the money or whatever has happened. So, but in my own experience, you would think that having scheduled sex would be, one of those things that you would push past your own no, because we've already scheduled that this is going to be the date for that. It tends to be that it kind of stokes your own fire so that you are ready to go, or
expectation.
Or 2 hours beforehand. Okay, we have a date tonight at 8, so let me get myself in the right mindset for that. So let me go for a walk or go to the gym. Let me do something else, to get myself prepared and ready for it, because we have plans for that tonight. Just like you would with food. I have so many food analogies. But if you're going out to dinner tonight, you have a big meal, you eat appropriately during the day. You don't have a huge lunch because then you're going to be ready for it. So same thing with sex. Just prepare yourself leading up to that experience.
So men, what Renée is saying here is don't masturbate before date night. I'm just teasing. Yeah. Sorry, just joking. Yeah. There's someplace else I was going to go with that.
My prescription for happiness.
Oh, I know what I wanted to say. So I think one of the dangers of that scheduled date night or scheduled sex night, like, every Saturday night, for example, one of the things to be aware of, I guess, is the hedonic treadmill and that idea that we habituate to everything. And so, if you're going to do that, make sure you have some different gears in the bedroom, or maybe it's not even in the bedroom. Maybe it's on the stairs or the laundry room or whatever. But, you want to switch things up and have different gears sexually so that it's not just routine every time.
Yeah. And I tell people that too, that routines get boring. And in my experience, and the research has shown that women tend to get bored more often than men do with sex. Men sometimes will get this, okay, this is my routine, I'm going to stick with it for the rest of life. And women need a little bit more variety. Men also need variety, so it's not a one thing. But what I also tell people is that the more senses you can bring into the sexual experience, the better off you are at achieving pleasure. So change it up, surprise people. Like, let me turn on, make a new playlist each time, or, change the lighting, bring fabrics in that feel luxurious to the touch.
Yeah, foods, blindfold.
Foods, massage oils, all those other things,
Candles.
Scalp massage, all those things can help to enhance the experience. So don't stop doing that once you're out of the dating phase, keep changing it up. And the surprise can be the most exciting part about it.
And one of the ideas that I loved, I forget where I heard this, but the idea is a yes, no, maybe list. Have you heard of that? Where you can go, I think you can just pick them up online for free and just print one out. But they have a list of, sort of sexual ideas or sexual sexual tasks. I'm trying to, what's the right word there? Sexual.
Yeah, things that you enjoy sexually.
Yeah, thank you. That's better.
Or would be open to exploring. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can check a box, yes, no, or maybe. Yes, if you're open to it. No, if you're like completely closed. Maybe if you're like, maybe down the road I could do that. But you have you and your partner fill them out, and then you compare. And, you might find out something that you've been dying to do that your partner is also interested in, that might radically improve your sex life. Or if you're a yes and your partner's a maybe, let's have a discussion about that. How come you're a maybe, or when would you be a yes, or under what circumstances would you be a yes, or what can I do to get you to yes, and just have a conversation about those things. I think that's a really good practice as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I provide couples that I coach with that kind of a list. And there's other ones out there on the internet that you can get that, things that may not have even occurred to you, because you've been doing things the same or pretty much the same way for a while. But going down the list and like, oh, I never thought about that. And just circling all the things that either pique your interest or that you would want to explore, and exchanging those lists. And you don't have to put every single thing on the list. There may be something that feels a little too vulnerable to share with a partner.
Bestiality.
It could still pique your interest, and there's nothing wrong with, entertaining that in your mind, but it may not be the thing that you want to share with your partner. But the list of things that you would want to explore with them or are open to, and exchanging those lists, and then you can bring that into the experiences as a surprise or a delight for your partner too, that you can incorporate those elements.
What do you think about the idea of, say, for example, going to a sex shop with your partner and just looking around and seeing what catches your interest?
Yeah. That's a perfect idea for a date, or even online. There's so many things online that just looking through and just entertaining the thoughts, even if it's things that you would never purchase, just like, oh my gosh, look at this thing. Look what they just put.
Hey, honey, come on. We're going to go get sushi in the city, and then we're going to stop by Good Vibrations.
Exactly. Yeah.
After we had a little sake.
Yeah.
But it is fun, and it is engaging and arousing, and you do come away with new ideas. And, I think that's something to offset that hedonic treadmill that we habituate to everything, good or bad. Right.
And you can dip your toe in the water. You don't have to go full fully in. You can start with just having a little bit deeper, intimate conversations. And what are some things that you haven't explored yet that you want to explore? And, we can share those things, and then just slowly gaining comfort around those kind of conversations. And then, just keep it evolving, basically.
And the other thing I have to say, just kind of in wrapping up, is that I interviewed a young lady who was an educational specialist for a good vibrations type shop on the East Coast. And she would do classes like once a week. And she would offer classes on like how to give a blowjob. And she said there would be a line out the door of women trying to come in and wanting to know tips and tricks about how to give a good blowjob. Then she would give the occasional class on cunnilingus, and there was crickets chirping. So the point is, men, we need to be open to learning some new skills. We need to be open to learning new ways of connecting, touching, and arousing if we want to get better at this. So, put your pride in your pocket, be humble, and, let's start learning or asking questions and learning some new tools.
Yeah. And it really speaks to the cultural conditioning, right? That women are conditioned that they should be good at, certain aspects of sex. You want to please your partner, so learn all these tools. And every Cosmo magazine has those kind of 10 tips to give him, to blow his mind, all this stuff. Men kind of get conditioned that you should just come out of the womb as a great lover. And if you have any deficiency in your knowledge, then something's wrong with you. And so why would you want to publicly admit that you are clueless about certain aspects of sex? But I think those classes are great, but your partner also is your best instructor. What feels good to your body. Asking that question. And I've been surprised with doing this with my own partner. It's like all the things I assume guys like, and then he tells me something. I'm like, really? Like, like it doesn't even have to necessarily be about genital stuff. It's just like, oh, I never really thought about touching a guy's armpit or whatever. It's like, I don't even know what specifically, but just things that you wouldn't expect would be, pleasurable to your partner if they can share that with you and feel comfortable in sharing those things and not feel like they're going to trigger you to be reactive towards it and, take it personally if they haven't been doing that for you. Even if you've been together for a while, to share something new that you like, that helps people feel more comfortable and helps you be able to pleasure one another better, which is the whole point.
Yeah. And I, it's interesting. I talk to a lot of, men about like their first time or what do they require. And one of the things man box culture tells us we should always be ready for sex. We know all about sex. You never admit to not knowing something about sex. But one of the things that's kind of blown me away over the years, and I've worked with men for 20 plus years, is we'll talk about sort of that first time. And most men that I've talked to regret that first time because there was no relationship, because there was no emotional connection. And then we go on to talk about sort of one night stands and, kind of what are your feelings about one night stands? And I'm always blown away that 90+% of men are like, yeah, I could do one night stands, but they're not really my thing because I found that I really need the emotional connection to have good sex. And, if I walk away after one night stand, I kind of feel, and I don't know what the right word is, but dirty, guilty, maybe a little bit ashamed or embarrassed. Like it just doesn't feel that good afterwards. Obviously, it feels good in the moment, but that one always surprises me.
Yeah, I hear that from male clients a lot. That there's this hollowness that comes with hookup culture. That they want more than that. They want a depth to it. They want the deep intimacy, but a lot of times they've guarded their heart because of past heartbreak, or they were brought up in a family or a culture where it wasn't cool to be emotional. You got told you were, a girl or homosexual if you expressed any emotions. And so there's that wall up, and so you don't get that heart-to-heart connection. But also, you're told that you should like to hook up with hundreds of women, and that's what being a great man is. When many men don't feel that way, and some women do, so it's an individual thing.
Yes.
But just honoring that
when I've heard that's switching a little bit in the generation of 20 somethings, where the women are so caught up in working up the ladder in the corporations that they're more into one night stands than the guys are. The guys are like, where's all the emotional connection? And the women are finding it difficult to find men that are of marriage quality for a variety of reasons.
Yeah. I see a lot of different things. Some women feel like that's the culture amongst women too. So there's this, unless you're playing that hookup game like the other women, then there's something wrong with you. And if you're wanting deeper connections, we're told that there's nothing out there for that, so it's the hookup culture seems better than nothing, which a lot of times women have convinced themselves that there isn't anything better than that out there. And they're not finding the guys that really want a deeper connection as well. So there's a lot broken in the whole dating culture. But also, I think men feel like it's weak to admit that they want more than that with partners. And it's the strongest thing, being vulnerable and sharing, I want this intimacy. I want this deeper connection with people. I don't want to rush into that situation where I come away feeling hollow or feeling like, now that that's done, I'm not interested in that person anymore. Let me move on to the next, instead of, taking the time you need to develop a deeper intimacy before going forward, physically with people. I think, just reassuring guys that that's okay to be somebody who really is looking for that. And here's some ways that you can do that and become more vulnerable in it. And it's more enriching. And that, like we said, at the end of your life, you're better off if you've developed these deep, intimate relationships, and you're bound to be a happier person at the end of your life if that's what you're working on.
Absolutely. And Renee, I would you do me a favor and just briefly explain to male listeners the difficulties that you have in doing what you're doing as a profession, because I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. And I know there's some men out there that I don't even know what the problem is, that they're not respectful, that they get aroused and they think anything's like okay. But you were mentioning, just I don't want any of my listeners to treat you disrespectfully.
Oh, we were talking about social media kind of stuff.
Yeah, just
the
pigs that are out there.
Yeah, so I've had several female sex coaches that are my colleagues, and myself. We get messages from guys, and in my mind, it's just immaturity. But we get either weird come-ons or inappropriate comments, talking about us sexually, or we get all people are sexual beings, and that's part of what I teach as a message. But there's somehow this idea that if you're a sex coach, you must be one of those women or something. I also get messages from like really conservative religious people, like trying to fix me, or
which is where the shame comes in for a lot of people.
Wash me clean of all my sins or whatever. Which, thank you so much for your concern, but I'm good. So it's unwelcome. But I understand where it comes from. I mean, you swim in this pool of deep, religious conditioning, and you're going to get wet. So all of us have been in that pool, and all of us, to some degree or another, have some kind of conditioning around sex being shameful, dirty, bad, whatever. And so I understand that's where it comes from. It's annoying,
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And there's one other, I just want to clarify one thing that, so I had an interview with Trip Lanier, and Trip actually had, and I don't know what the difference is in title, but he actually had someone come into his bedroom with he and his wife, kind of watch them have sex and give them pointers. But that is not what you do.
That's not what I do. There are some sex coaches who do that, or do intimate touch. Sometimes people are so not in touch with their bodies that they actually benefit from, sexual massage, those kinds of things. That's not what I do either. But
I can also see trauma being part of that as well for people.
For sure, yeah. And I'm in circles of people who do trauma therapy and do trauma informed coaching, and a lot of it is around that, just reattuning your body to see touch as safe. And I do online coaching, so sometimes I'll guide people to touch their bodies in ways that kind of bring it back into their nervous system, that touch is safe, and imagining being approached and those kinds of things that a lot of times are really useful for people who've been through a lot of trauma and don't feel like, being touched is a safe thing. But for me, it's online coaching. I do one-on-one and I do couples. I do couples. I coach couples and individuals on sexuality, on empowerment, on some of it is around being in that high achiever mode, because I've transitioned. And there's a lot of conditioning with men around identity and their careers. This past year, a lot of people lost a lot of money, and we have this your net worth is your worth kind of thing in male culture. A lot of times it's
masculinity equals net worth. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so a lot of people, because that has been shaken a bit, they are finding themselves feeling less empowered sexually as well, because they put a lot of their identity on achievement in business and those kinds of things. So a lot of that comes up in the coaching I do too, and how to become more in tune with the body, how to be more on board with your feelings and how to manage feelings and thoughts and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it makes me think of that, kind of classic bumper sticker that I used to see on pickup trucks. He who dies with the most toys wins. And men, that's just not true. But I mean, it's how we're socialized. It's how we're conditioned. But, having the most toys doesn't mean you're happy or satisfied with your life. So, Renée, thank you very much for joining me on this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And just as a reminder to you listeners, Dr. Hilliard is generously offering a complimentary 30-minute coaching consult, and you can find out more by emailing her at Dr. R. Hilliard, DrRHillard @gmail.com. And you can also, there's a Calendly link. Is there a website that they can go to find that link?
It's on my website, which is reneehilliard.com. And then I think in the notes you have the Calendly link that they can just go with.
Yeah, and I'll put that in the podcast notes. So if you want to schedule a 30-minute free consult with her, you can book it, or you can find the link in the podcast notes when it goes live. So thank you very much, Renée. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, John, for having me on.
My pleasure. And that's it for this episode of The Evolved Caveman. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, if you found it useful at all, please go to Apple Podcasts and rate, review, and share with your friends. Thanks so much. And that's it for this episode. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.